Hey guys, welcome back to DDJ's Inferno, the weekly show where we talk about issues relevant to men and the manosphere. And today, our guest is Sandman, the largest and I think possibly one of the oldest MGTOW YouTubers on the internet. But before we jump into the interview, I want to take care of a couple real quick housekeeping things. First and foremost, if you have questions, please hold the questions to the end. There'll be a Q&A segment for those people that are new here. Go ahead and when you type your question, type it in caps and brackets and then who the question is to. Please do not type multi-part questions as we want to be able to make sure that we have plenty of time for everybody else to get the questions, and there's a character limit. Also on the lower right-hand side of the screen, if you hover your mouse over it, if you're on a desktop or Twitch TV, you'll see a little question mark with a green box, and occasionally you'll see a little green Bukkake Chokeslam that will float up. You earn Bukkake Chokeslams by playing some of the games and just by watching the stream. You can redeem those to ask questions as well. I'll grab those via Streamlabs, and I'll go ahead and address those questions as well during the Q&A segment of the stream. So with that out of the way, Sandman, welcome. Give me a second here. Let me unmute everybody so they can hear you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Sandman. I pretty much, like DDJ said, I've got the largest MGTOW channel right now, unless of course MGTOW 101 shows up and starts making content again. You go ahead, ask me some questions. I don't know what else to say.
No problem. Well, and I think he got his channel taken down because he was buying subs or something. I remember he posted something on Twitter when his channel finally got taken down, and they said that there was like some kind of weird stuff going on with his channel. He posted their reasoning behind it. He disagreed with it, but it is what it is.
Well, I mean, it could have been that somebody was buying views or subs for him, because I saw like the view count right before the channel got shut down was like up to like 300,000-400,000 views a day. So it's kind of like maybe that's what YouTube didn't like. I don't know.
Yeah, that
so
would. I
agree. Paying for it, so I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, most people know obviously who you are, but let's kind of go into some of the history and a little bit about you. So why don't you talk a little bit about what made you go your own way?
I was 2013. I just got out of a 10-year relationship, and I was looking to get back into the dating market. And I just didn't want to jump in without understanding what the hell had happened to me for the last, let's say, 15 years before that. So I started going online and looking for dating advice. And I randomly stumbled into Stardust videos and Girl Writes What and Paul Elam. This is the summer 2013. And I just started consuming as much content as I could. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't dating advice. This is advice as to why I shouldn't be dating at all. Right? So, I kind of shrugged it off. And then in the fall of 2013, I tried to date a few people. And then all the things that I had just listened to started coming into my mind, because all the things that Stardust had observed were pretty much accurate. So at that point, I got really pissed off. The red pill rage hit me, and I started producing content. And then once I did that, things started to cement one piece at a time. I put out a video called, can't remember what it's called. Women Are Incapable of Love. And I got 100 subs almost in like a day or two. And I was just like impressed that a lot of people found it valuable and interesting. And that encouraged me to produce more content. So I just went at it.
Okay. Well, when you said that you were finding these red pill truths that you were, discovering in the dating scene, can you give us some examples of some of the stuff that you came across?
Well, believe it or not, like I had never really been friend zoned until I was like 35. And then in the fall of 2013, I was sort of talking to this chick online, and, we're talking over the phone, and she pretty much friend zoned me. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Right. And I've had friends who told me about I thought the friend zone was like a myth or something. Right? So when that happened, I was like, what the fuck? And then I realized what was going on, and that really, really pissed me off. And the reason, like before that, I hadn't been friend zoned is because, I worked out, I put a lot of effort into myself, and women would just come to me, and I would either accept them or reject them. And so I never really had to go out and pursue women. I never really pursued women, period. And
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I would interject real quick. It's funny because when you talk to the PUAs or when you watch their content, it's funny because the PUAs are like, oh, you got to go out and you got to approach so many women and you got to do this and that, and that's never been my experience. It's always been my experience that if a woman is interested in you, she'll let you know, and then you can, like you said, you can choose to either pursue or step away at that point. And that's been the experience of myself and experience of other guys that I've known. So it's just kind of funny that you bring that up. I just kind of wanted to underscore that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, early in high school, I mean, I didn't really have anyone interested because I wasn't working out. I wasn't really all that eloquent. I was kind of nerdy and awkward. So when I changed, women just flocked to me, and I wasn't necessarily doing it for the female attention. It just happened. So, like my entire life, that's pretty much been it. And I still get women interested. They'll let me know, and I'm just kind of like, I don't, I don't say anything, or I just kind of lead them on, and it's kind of fun. But whatever.
Oh, sure. You got to play with them a little bit. Well, let me ask you this. I know that you do travel videos. You want to talk a little bit about those a little bit as well?
Well, I've done those. I've got still another 60 to 100 videos that are shot in the bag that I just can't edit because my hands are just killing me, right? So for now, I'm probably going to be cutting off the travel stuff just so that I can have some, the repetitive strain of editing doesn't destroy my hands entirely. But yeah, the travel videos are fun. It's fun to hit the road and make like series vlogs where you like travel one day and you travel the next and you just kind of see like 4 or 5 places in a day. It's pretty cool. But again, it's very, very exhausting and very tiring. And I don't think a lot of people could actually handle it because it's you have to be incredibly disciplined in terms of like what you're going to see, and then you also have to be kind of spontaneous because you're going to run into random things, and then you also have to be outgoing because you're meeting people and you're interviewing them, and you kind of have to navigate all of that while you're on the road too, right? So your technology, everything has to work efficiently, so
Exactly. I totally get that. Now, let me ask you. So when you made your first video, was your first video more of a red pill truth video, or was it more of a men going their own way type of video? I mean, when did you start actually adopting the MGTOW title or the MGTOW label?
I started using it right away because that, back then people were that's what people were searching for on YouTube, and I'd type in MGTOW and I'd see people like, I don't know, Moberg and Stardust and Barbarossa, and who else was on back then? What's his name? I can't remember his name. Bad, my bad.
Was Barbar was Barbar and Marcus on back then?
I'm not sure about Marcus. I can't remember exactly. But
Okay.
there was the Australian guy who's got like the deep voice, who does those videos with the long like time lapse videos. I can't remember his name.
Coltane or
No, Coltrane wasn't around back then.
Spetsnaz.
Spetsnaz, there you go.
oh yeah,
He
okay,
at the same time that I did, but he
right.
hasn't been producing content for quite a while now. So yeah, that's kind of why he's not on the radar for me. Yeah, like there was limited content back then, so they'd produce a video maybe once a week, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. Stardust and Barbarossa were kind of winding down. Spetsnaz was just kind of starting. There were a few other content producers, but there wasn't really all that much stuff going on back then.
Right.
And the first video I put out.
Pardon
Go
me
ahead.
for just a moment. I just wanted to thank IRAD69 for subscribing via Twitch Prime. So, and also wanted to interject too. One of the things that I like about Spetsnaz videos is that his videos are a little bit longer, so they're like almost like watching a documentary in a way.
Yeah,
So,
especially with the time lapse stuff that he's got going on. Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
So I'm sorry. Go on.
So yeah, no, after I kind of was red pilled, I started looking at things. That whole friend zone incident happened, and then I saw the Costa Concordia thing. There was a story about the Costa Concordia and the sinking of the ship, and the story leaked that the captain's what's her name? I can't remember the woman's name, but the captain's he basically had a mistress that was on the ship, and he was trying to impress her, so he actually brought the ship too close to the rocks, and that's what originally basically caused the damage that actually sank the ship. So that kind of, that I'm like, what the fuck? Like, he literally risked thousands of lives to impress this woman. So that was kind of like a big red pill moment.
So,
And go
so,
ahead.
so, so what you're saying is that he was trying to get laid, and in the trade, everybody got fucked.
Pretty much. So
Go on.
yeah, so that was the first video I put out, and a couple people were like, "Oh, this is it's good content, good for a first video." And then then I kind of consume more content after that, and then I realized, wait a minute, I'm like, women don't actually love you. This is really interesting. And then I put that video out, and then that's when people started really gravitating towards my channel, and all of a sudden it started growing, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna start putting more content out. And I put out, I don't know, I can't remember, like 5-10 videos, and then I took a break for a month, and then I finally came back to it again when another red pilling happened, and I was like, I got pissed off again, so I put out more videos after that. And then the ice storm of 2013 happened, and I was driving around, and it was like all the men were out working, getting the power back, cleaning the ice off the roads, and all the women were inside their houses without power, staring at everyone working from the windows, like watching what was going on. And I put out a video about that, and it was like people are like, "Oh my God," like I wish I was able to film more of the women and standing in the windows, because that would have been like amazing. Like just to show like they're not doing anything, they're just kind of expecting everyone to rescue them from this. At the time it was pretty bad, right? It was like minus 20 degrees Celsius here, and the power was gone, so the heaters weren't running, so people were freezing in their homes, right? Like it was pretty brutal for
Right.
like 2-3 days in the whole
And this
city. So
was in Kazakhstan, right?
pretty much, yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's cold there all the time, but yeah, I remember that ice storm. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, right now it's like 35, 40 degrees Celsius. It's like freaking hot right now. Like air conditioners, like it's like you don't get like normal temperature for longer than a few weeks. It either overshoots to the cold or overshoots to the hot. And
Right.
then you get maybe like maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks of like nice weather, and then it just disappears.
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Obviously you've been making content for a very long time. And, as the biggest MGTOW content creator out there, how do you define men going their own way?
I mean, you mean as like a group or as individuals?
As individuals, I mean, I think that even though there is a MGTOW community, I think it's more of a community of individuals rather than like a collectivist organization type of thing. So, yeah, as an individual.
Just it depends. Like everyone's got their own thing, right? Like some people will still date, some people are complete monk mode. It just depends on what stage you're at and just how enlightened you are in terms of like understanding female nature and how it affects you emotionally. I mean, there's a lot of variables. You can't really label everyone under in the same situation.
Right. I get. Yeah. I guess what I was saying is, I guess where I was headed was, obviously avoiding marriage is I think
Yeah,
the baseline,
yeah,
whether it be
cohabitation marriage is
right,
the base. Yeah, for sure.
right. Um, so now that I mean, you've been online for a long time. I mean, 2013. It's now 2018. So you've been doing this for 5 years.
It doesn't feel like that much because I haven't taken a break and I just keep going, right? So it's like, 5 years doesn't seem like it seems like I started like maybe 2 years ago. That's kind of how I feel.
Right.
So yeah.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you, over the time when you've been making videos, what have your biggest challenges been on your channel?
I mean, content wise, like I don't have a problem producing content. It's just, like I've had issues with my throat, I've had issues with my hands. Now I've got other health issues. So it's like, I would just say that the grueling constant production is actually taking its toll on my health. So I have to kind of be really, really careful. So, I've been using more like voice to text software, but then if I use my voice too much, then I get throat problems. But if I don't use my voice all that much, then, I'll have to use my hands, and I type out every single script that I do pretty much. So yeah, it takes its toll after a while. So, it takes you 2 hours of typing every day for like 5 years. It'll add up after time.
Right. Well, let's talk about your creative process a little bit. I mean, you're putting out nearly daily content. What is the process you go through to make videos? I know you do a lot of sponsored videos. Talk about those things.
Yeah, it's great because a lot of people just give me the idea. That way I don't have to constantly think about what I'm going to produce. I mean, when people don't give me idea, then I go on to like Reddit or I go on to MGTOW.com and I look for an interesting topic that I can actually produce something on. But like I've done so many topics that it's just at this point it's better for me to get those questions from people with the donations, because that allows me to kind of just focus on their question instead of like trying to find content, trying to find the ideas for content. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people do live streams, because it's a lot easier than just going and finding something to talk about, and then like doing it every day is insane. Like, you know, if you have to find an idea. And in the beginning, that's kind of what I was doing for the first 3-4 months. So I was kind of looking at my personal life, looking at, you know, stories that people were sharing. You know, so the first thing I do in the day is I check my emails, see what new topics have come in. You know, I'll collect 10 photos for my, you know, just background images, which do help. People actually do watch more because of those images. I found there was a bump because people saw the high quality pictures for whatever reason.
Sure.
And then I'll, you know, sometime in the afternoon, I'll type out maybe half or a third of the script, then take some breaks and type out the other bit. And then, you know, later at night, I'll basically record. And now I send out my audio to an editor, so he basically just edits it and sends it back to me. So
Nice.
that saves my hand from falling apart from editing, you know. So
Sure.
I mean, there's not too much to it. I mean, the best content I find is when I actually just sit down and type it out. My thought process works a lot better when I'm typing. So when I'm doing voice to text, the ideas and the comedy doesn't actually flow as well. So
that makes sense. Also, just to interject here, John Vent, thank you for subscribing via Twitch Prime. I appreciate it. Well, let me ask you this. Let's shift gears a little bit, Sandman. Like I said, you're one of the oldest content creators on YouTube for MGTOW content. Can you go into a little bit of the history of like how the last 5 years has been for MGTOW community, especially for those people that are relatively new to going their own way?
I mean, 2013, it was mostly like academic style MGTOW content, and there wasn't really too much humor in the community. It was very, very serious. Community was very, very small and hardcore. You know, to early 2014, you know, Stardust and Barbarossa were starting to wind down their channels. Like they weren't producing very much content. So when I showed up, there was kind of like a vacuum for content. Like there wasn't very much content. Like Spetsnaz was putting out maybe 3-4 videos a week. So it was like one a week. So like there wasn't really anything there to sustain people coming back on a consistent basis. So I started the daily dose of red pills at the end of January 2014. And yeah, then my subscriber growth started. And then people suggested that I start taking donations. And I was like, okay. So I said, sure. And I didn't check my email for like 3-4 days. And then I came back, and then all of a sudden there were all these PayPal donations. And, you know, one person emailed me back and said, well, you're not making my video, so I'm going to take the money back. And I was like, what? And then I looked in my PayPal account. I was like, what? There's money here? What? So that was kind of shocking that, you know, that was happening. And then I just kept producing videos, and more people kept suggesting content. So I was kind of shocked that was working, because it wasn't really working for Stardust and Barbarossa, because they had asked for money, and you know, Stardust had pulled the video asking for money down. Like at one point it was up there. I wish I'd recorded it. It's hilarious. And then you know, that video was taken down, and then all of a sudden there was like a conflict in MGTOW, because you know, everyone started thinking that I was producing content that wasn't up to the same academic level that it was in 2013 and before. So there was a controversy because I was actually discussing real life situations that people were dealing with in terms of like mother-in-laws and, you know, like typical relationship stuff that most people wouldn't really talk about. They talk about female nature like as this nebulous thing, but they wouldn't actually talk about specific situations with girlfriends or, you know, wives or this or that. And I think people started to kind of connect those individual personal stories more. And I think that's when it really started to grow. And then I had about 4,000 or 5,000 subscribers, and I decided, hey, I'm going to show up at the men's rights movement's first conference, right? So I just wanted to see kind of what was going on there and how that kind of all worked out. And yeah, I met some fanboys there, and I was like, uh-oh, this is kind of uncomfortable and awkward. I saw these like, you know, looks in their faces, like the Beatles, you know, like the Beatles, screaming Beatles fans back in the 50s. I'm like, oh fuck, I better get the hell out of here. Like, you know, it was kind of like, I didn't like that. And that was 5,000 subscribers. I could just imagine if I actually did like a meet and greet now, it'd be like, uh-oh, you know. But I was still involved in the men's rights movement. Like I was, you know, involved in with an organization here in Toronto. I was filming videos for them. I can't remember, like, who else did I meet? I met a bunch of different people. Yeah, I kind of met a lot of people in the men's rights movement, and I kind of got this very culty vibe from it, like this kind of like, let's pat ourselves on the back all the time, and it kind of that made me kind of feel weird about it. It was like there's something bizarre about this whole thing. And then I made one video where I actually interviewed this woman who was interested in, like, she was basically helping men's rights. She's like, you know, people asked her, why is men's rights so good? And she's like, men's rights great because it helps women. It's like, huh? Right? Like,
Well,
and I
yeah.
put that down, and people were like, what the fuck? Right? Like, what, you know, like, oh, this is not good. I think that was in 2000 and end of 2014, maybe 2015. So I kind of started to see that the men's rights movement, while it was valuable, didn't actually like, there were some elements to it that were, you know, like, I met a couple fedora wearing MRAs, and I was like, the cliche is completely correct and accurate. I'm like, you know,
Right,
you know,
right.
all he was missing was the trench coat and the samurai sword, and he would have been like perfect, right? Like,
Oh,
so,
absolutely. Yeah.
so
Well, and I came from the MRA movement as well, and so because you know I worked in family law for just over 10
yeah.
years, and I was part of the MRA movement for a while, and I noticed a lot of that culty attitude as well when it came to patting themselves on the back and trying to get a little bit narcissistic for no reason. And I also noticed too that they just didn't seem to be very effective at anything that they tried.
Well, they were effective at drawing a crowd of angry feminists. I mean, that was the thing that they were like. That's the thing that they were known for. Like, I remember the first MRA thing that I went to was Karen Strawn speaking at Ryerson University, and downstairs there wasn't necessarily a protest, but there were like 6, 7, 8 security guards down in the lobby of the building and protecting the stairwells, because every time they did one of these talks before, they were pulling the fire bells. There were tons of feminists there. Big Red had showed up. Like, all kinds of crazy things were going on.
Oh wow! So
So
did you get a chance to talk to Big Red?
no, and I don't want to talk to Big Red.
But
I would.
you could say I was one of the guys she read at.
Yeah, it's just oh my God. Like, I can't believe that stuff was going on. She embarrassed feminists in general. But I remember I went to one family event. This was in 2000, and I think it was at the end of 2013. So I just started my channel, and there was this woman. She was like 20, 21. I know her. I pretty much, she grew up. I knew her as a kid and all this kind of stuff. It's like a family friend, and she took gender studies in I can't remember what university, and she was talking about her time at gender studies, and I told her, oh, what do you think about the MRA? And she's like, oh, Big Red embarrassed us all, and all this kind of stuff, and I did, and her mother was like, so are you involved in the MRA? And I'm like, no, and
Oh, that's funny.
it was brutal, right? I mean, she gave me this like look, like, are you involved in the MRA? Like, with this like weird like voice, like, oh fuck, right? Like, I'm not going to say anything, right? Like,
Right. Not going to get
so
witch hunted today.
no, but yeah, it's just very, very interesting how like, all this kind of stuff was kind of happening all at the same time, and eventually I just kind of drifted apart from the MRA. The last event I went to was the what do you call it? The Red Pill film here in Toronto. They had a screening. Somebody sent me a donation and wanted me to go watch it and review it. And I was like, all right, okay. So, and then the cameras were out everywhere, and the room was probably 40%, maybe 45% filled with women, and they were trying to like take over the room in the discussion. And I was just like, this is getting ridiculous. Like, now it's getting outnumbered, women to men, and this is not going to work. They've subverted it, and it's just going to start becoming ineffectual, completely ineffectual. So, I mean, I haven't really
Wait,
seen much. Go ahead.
wait a minute. So you're telling me that at the Red Pill screening in Toronto,
Yeah.
they had like a Q&A section, I'm assuming, afterward. Is
Yeah.
that okay? So they had a Q&A section afterward, and feminists showed up and pretty much just co-opted the conversation.
Well, yeah, they were. I don't think they were necessarily feminists, but the guys that were there were with like girlfriends or like it had become popularized. It had become, something that was sort of socially acceptable to be at. Whereas before that, it was kind of like it was very rare to see a woman in the crowd unless she was there to like attack someone, right? It was usually like 98% men, and now it was like 40% women. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? And they were all orderly. There was no insults, and there was, it was not like there wasn't anything controversial about it. It was just kind of like, it had lost its edginess completely. Like nobody really cared. And a few guys who were like MRAs stood up and they got pissed off and they didn't want the women to keep asking questions because they found they thought it was basically they thought they were like trying to take over the conversation, and which was kind of what was happening.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second. But I mean, as the alt-right has risen, as conservative voices have started to, come back to the conversation a little bit in a lot of conversations that used to be controlled by SJWs and feminists. I mean, could it be feasible that some of these women are legitimately into trying to rebalance the situation between men and women because feminism has knocked it out of balance so much? Or do you think they were cosplaying? Or, I mean, because I'm of a two minds on the subject. And so I kind of want to get your views on that.
I think there are women who are legitimately trying to solve some of these issues because they're scared. They see what's kind of happening between men and women. But I think that if you have this flood of like, half the room all of a sudden being women in such a short period of time with like in a year or two, like, I mean, that's not really all that honest. I don't think. I think it's kind of like, if it trickled in slowly, if I went to that red pill screening and it was maybe 10% women in the audience, yeah, then I could believe that, but not the numbers that I saw. And a lot of them kind of look like feminists. They had, the short dyed hair, and it was almost like they were there to tone police the events. They figured it's better for them to be orderly and in the event, like trying to direct the conversation instead of being outside protesting. So I think
so you're saying they
strapped.
were practicing entryism.
I don't even know what that really means, but
Basically, entryism is when one organization kind of infiltrates another organization to co-opt the direction or to co-opt the organization itself. Sometimes it's done through subterfuge, and other times it's done overtly.
yeah, I could say that that's pretty fair. I could say that was going on.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. I mean, obviously, you'd been through some of these events and doing that. I mean, what was your takeaway on the red pill? I didn't watch your video. I apologize.
I mean, it was her basically talking about her personal journey and then kind of working the MRA into there. And, she had her interviews with Paul Elam and, just the typical men's rights people that were there, especially with the first men's rights conference. I saw her filming. She had some guy there filming, the event and all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's a good intro for people who have no idea what's going on. And then, they kind of see the MRA and they kind of understand what was going on. And they kind of, at the end, she interjects and puts a little bit of MGTOW out there, but not very much. It's like, a couple minutes towards the end. And she had an interview with Big Red. And I mean, if you were involved in the MRA, if you had already understood all these things and followed all these people, you would have gotten all this content a long time before. Like, it took her a few years to put everything together and finally edit the whole thing down, right?
Right. Okay. So I noticed that when it comes to a lot of guys within the MGTOW community, there seems to be a bit of an undercurrent of how things may not change as men walk away. And some people have even talked about societal collapse. What do you see? I mean, you've been in the MGTOW community for 5 years. Where do you see things going from this point forward? I mean, do you see any hope at all, or do you think that there's going to be a collapse and a reset?
Well, I mean, birth rates continue to decline. I mean, 2016 in the United States, more white people died than white people were born. So you're starting to see a breakdown in terms of relationships to the point where people aren't procreating. Most Eastern Europe, birth rates are like 1.345. Most of Europe, it's the same thing. This is the societal collapse because if you start losing, if your population starts to shrink like that, you can't grow your economy without bringing people in from the third world. As that happens, then your country is no longer first world. It starts to decline. The demographics shift, and then the first world starts becoming the third world. And it's not like a collapse that's going to happen right away. It's going to take a couple generations, but it's happening. I mean, look at South Africa, for example. They've got laws where they have to basically hire a certain number of blacks, and they have to hire, they can only hire like 10% of whites. They have to hire based on proportional representation based on the society. So it gets to the point where, it becomes dysfunctional. And I'm not saying it's happening because of race or because of education or lack thereof. I'm just saying, like, if you're replacing demographics that don't have the same cultural values, and they come in and they run like an organization, or they make up the majority of the people in that organization, they're going to bring all their cultural baggage with them, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, and that's going to affect the culture itself in those companies and those organizations. And the corruption, it will begin if they come from a more corrupt country. I mean, look what's happening in Mexico now, right? So you basically got the drug lords who are basically running the country, but the number of female politicians and socialists keeps going up, and they're actually killing female politicians or female candidates for office that they don't like. So they don't care, right? Like they want the people that are in office that they want, and that's pretty much it. So we're starting to see all of these things, and it's slowly building up in the system. The systems don't collapse like right away. They take a long time to kind of grind to a halt, and then they just fall off a cliff. But it takes a long decline before that happens.
Yeah, it's kind of a slow roll. And what's interesting about South Africa, when you bring it up, is that there is white genocide going on there right now, and I know that Russia's talking about taking in some refugees from there because no one else will.
Well, I mean, the problem with South Africa, I've had a couple friends that I grew up with that came to Canada from South Africa, and one of my friends in high school was telling me that they limited the amount of money that whites could take out of the country. So if you were a wealthy South African, it was really difficult to get your assets out of the country. You couldn't take cash out. They wouldn't let you transfer the money out. So the friend who came here, his family, they basically converted their money into diamonds, and then they basically smuggled the diamonds to Canada, with them when they flew to Canada. And then they eventually converted the diamonds back into cash. So that was how they kind of got their money out of the country.
Jesus.
So they took a big to get, so it's not as simple as, oh, why don't the South Africans migrate to Russia? Well, yeah, or migrate to Canada or Australia or whatever. Yeah, but if you want to be poor and start from zero, go ahead, right? But if you already have a house paid off, if you've got money and you've got assets in South Africa, you can't liquidate those things and leave the country. Like, who are you going to sell your land to in South Africa? Black farmers who are poor, they're not, they don't have the money to buy that land. So you're going to stay as long as you can because it's paid off. You've got income, you've got a lifestyle. So the socialist government in South Africa is making it very difficult for the capitalists that remain to leave, especially if they're white and they have assets.
Right. That's pretty crazy. And it was interesting too, is that as you were talking about Mexico and the Mexican government, it's actually kind of funny that the president who was just recently elected, one of his campaign platforms, and I'm paraphrasing here, but his campaign platform is, our country is dog shit and our citizens have a right to go into the United States regardless of whether they're illegal or legal. So everybody should get the fuck out. Oh yeah, and before you leave, elect me as president. It's really retarded.
Yeah, I mean, they could potentially turn Mexico into another Venezuela. I mean, the socialists are taking over, but you have to remember the cartels are also kind of behind a lot of that.
Right. Well,
So
the cartels are actually working with the president. The president's actually talking about cartel amnesty. He's talking about socializing education for cartel members. And it turns out that when people looked into the current president's history, he actually, you bring up how Mexico may turn into the next Venezuela. What's interesting is the current president there, the president elect, he actually, the last few campaigns, he's worked with Venezuelan government officials on his campaign. So he has history with Venezuela socialists.
I'm not surprised. I mean, like we're seeing socialism and communism rise all over the world, and people are just not aware of this. Like I come from a former communist country from Eastern Europe, and I'll even talk to my mother. I'll say, communism's making a rise. She's like, good, it needs to come back. I'm like, are you crazy? Like, didn't communists kill your grandfather and take away all his wealth? And like, it doesn't matter. Like it's like the female need to kind of nurture and help everybody. It supersedes even their own male family members. So it's kind of a scary thing to watch, especially with people around you. It's as Jordan Peterson even was saying, like how the opposite of the patriarchy is this tyranny of the feminine. And what would a female dictatorship look like? What would female power in society look like? And he says it's kind of like the overbearing mother, the mother that wants to control her children to the point where she stifles their development. And that's kind of what we're seeing in society in terms of the development of boys into men, because they're kind of being held back. You see girls doing well in school, but boys are being put on drugs to kind of like sedate them and not let them be masculine. And so you're kind of seeing that overbearingness kind of play itself out in all the institutions in our society, because they're starting to increasingly be taken over by women.
Well, and you see this also with Sweden. I mean, Sweden, I like to use Sweden as the incubator, because I think Sweden is the canary in the coal mine. I mean, they have an openly feminist government. They completely demonize masculinity of all kinds, unless, of course, you're an illegal immigrant or you're a confirmed terrorist. And then they'll give you government welfare and change your name and provide you all the information that you want to, make your life better, as long as you're raping their citizens. Sweden is just a complete socialist shithole. But again, as a feminist organization, they have completely emasculated their men there. And now there's just so much civil unrest. It's not even funny anymore.
Well, I don't know if they've completely emasculated. I mean, if you look at Jordan Peterson's talks, he talks about how what happens in Sweden is as a society becomes more feminist, you start to see more extremes in terms of masculine and feminine behavior. So men start to take on more engineering jobs, for example. Like the differences between male and female interactions and choices start to polarize. Men and women polarize. And I think you're kind of seeing that in Sweden. I don't know. Like that's what he says. I've never been to Sweden. I'd have to like there for a few weeks and kind of see what's going on.
Right. And one of the reasons that Sweden has over 60 no-go zones right now is because the feminist government has hamstrung their law enforcement. So police officers are quitting in droves because they can't do their job. Every time they turn around, they're being accused of racism or they're being accused of something else, when the reality is that they're just trying to stop crime. Now there's an arms pipeline that is arming Muslim terrorists. These terrorists are getting like hand grenades. They've got AK-47s. They've got a deep pipeline. They control neighborhoods completely. And Sweden, I think it was about a month or a month and a half ago, just sent out a pamphlet to every household saying, this is what you should do in the middle of a war. And they're starting to deploy their National Guard to do exercises, because I think that they're trying to figure out whether or not they're going to use the National Guard to try to take their country back. But they know it's out of control, and there are entire swaths that just they just ignore the Swedish government, and there's no recourse.
Well, I was watching something recently, and somebody made a comment about Islam, and they said, Islam. One of the ISIS leaders, I believe, I can't remember who exactly said this, but he said, the West has all the clocks and all of the watches, but Islam has all the time in the world, which means, they're going to, the slow takeover of Europe will take a generation or two, not generation, maybe like 4, 5, 6, 7 generations, however long it takes. And I kind of experienced this because I remember I was old enough to kind of remember what was going on in the Bosnian War. And I've actually traveled to Bosnia as a child, and I remember how beautiful it was, and how everyone was relatively peaceful because the country was relatively prosperous. Once a country starts to run into economic issues, then all of these kind of polarizing things and start to kind of the all this stuff kind of shifts up to the surface, and all of a sudden you create a civil war. So, I mean, if there was a Great Depression, let's say, and Europe was dealing with it, then all you would see a civil war. Like you'd start to see Muslims, there would be some kind of a civil war, but it would be relatively limited at this point. I think it's going to take a while before the demographics shift enough to the point where there's actually going to be some kind of a civil war. I mean, it's kind of scary for me because I'm in Canada, I'm in Toronto, and the demographics of this city are changing so rapidly. Like, I think to myself, I'm going to move out over here. And then I travel there and I check out the city and I'm like, wow, the demographics changed in that city in the span of like 3 years. Because what's happening is, I've got friends from India and, they grew up here, and they moved to Brampton, which is this kind of suburb of Toronto. And now Brampton's something like, I don't know, it's like 50, 60, 70 maybe percent Indian right now, Indian and Pakistani. So you're starting to see like they vote in their own blocks. So all the candidates in that area are all Indian or Pakistani. So it doesn't matter who wins, somebody from that background is going to get in. Right. So, or like even here, like where I live right now, I'll take a walk to a nearby park and I'll see, because on one side of the road, you've got mostly immigrant housing in big condominium towers, like older condominium towers. And on the other side, you've got like suburban, 99% white kind of like people living there. And in the park, you see both groups kind of meet, right? And they use the park, and you'll see one side kind of on one side of the park, and you'll see the other side on the other side of the park, and they don't interact with one another. They're kind of just like looking at each other and I kind of walk through between both groups, and I'm like, I'm like kind of like just observing. I'm like, I look over on the side that's all recent immigrants, and they've got like 3-4 children. Like a lot of the women are wearing burqas, or completely covered.
Exactly.
And on the other side, and it's like you're seeing this when you see this on a daily basis. You kind of wonder, and then you drive an hour out of this town, you look for a place that you want to move to a place that's kind of different, and then a lot of the Indian people that are in Brampton are leaving Brampton because they don't want to be around other Indian people. There's internal racism because the people who kind of grew up here and assimilated don't want to be around new arrivals from India. So they pick up and they move to another city.
Well, and I think that the new arrivals are refusing to assimilate. I mean, it's not the race; it's the fact that the multiculturalism doesn't work when your culture refuses to assimilate. We're seeing this in places in the United States as well. I know Dearborn, Michigan, for example, is a perfect example of this, where that's a serious problem. And it's funny, you were talking about Toronto and those areas around there. I have friends in Saskatchewan, and they're saying the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I went to Dearborn. I was there last fall, and I showed up at a hotel, and all the staff and all the people working the front desk were Muslims. And I was like, okay, I don't have an issue with that because I'm in Toronto. It's like I see this all the time. But it's Dearborn, Michigan, right? Like it's the States. It's a completely different thing. And I think, what's the population, like 100 or 200,000 there? I think I can't remember what the exact.
Right, but it's a federal government that is settling them, and that's the thing that people don't understand is that they settle them and then they change the demographics, and now they're talking about trying to, we have the Second Amendment gun rights here in the United States, and now they're talking about trying to make it so that it's illegal to own guns in these places that are primarily Muslims. And I think once you take away the guns, you're going to see the same problems that you see in Europe and the UK.
I totally agree with you. I mean, that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah. So, well, let's kind of switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
So, I know that the Dollhouse sponsors you, and I know that you have received some love dolls, but I heard a rumor that you might be working on, or possibly might be working on a doll talk show. Any word on that, or can you give us some history, kind of tell us what's going on or what happened, or if the plans have changed?
Right now, like I'm saying, my hands, I can't edit travel videos, so I'm pretty much taken that out of the plan. Right now, I have to keep my channel going the way I have, and I'm probably going to do some more talks with Phil Bass. But at this point, I'd love to do like a videos like that, but I just can't. Like it's just like I'd have to. It's not going to work out right now. It's just in terms of health, I can't do it. I
Sure.
mean, so I mean, this year I haven't really traveled anywhere. I've kind of been just posting videos that I filmed last year and last fall, and even the year before, like stuff that I haven't really like stuff that I did. I just can't. Like it's just too much. So.
Right. Now, have you received, I mean, what's the audience response been um, with the whole love doll thing that you've seen so far? Has it been positive? Has it been negative? Talk a little bit about that.
It's been mostly positive, but then a few people have been extremely negative. You know, like you get the PUA type MGTOWs who are masquerading MGTOWs who are basically PUAs in disguise. They don't like it because it takes away from selling erectile dysfunction pills and PUA courses. So
Right.
there was a bit of a backlash when I posted that, and I'm just kind of like, I really don't care about that kind of backlash. It doesn't really bother me, but it's just the ferocity of their like convictions that PUA is the way to go, and that they need that female validation constantly. If they don't get it, you can't get it from a doll. So I'm gonna keep chasing women, but I'm gonna pretend to be MGTOW at the same time so that people will watch me and give me attention.
Right.
So it's ridiculous.
That makes sense. Pardon me for just a moment. Drop the Hammer. I just wanted to say thank you for subscribing via Twitch Prime. I appreciate it. That's Drop the Hammer now. Sorry. So yeah, so I think that I totally get it. Is there anything else that you want to kind of go over or cover before we
Your
go to the
questions
Q&A?
are fantastic. So just keep shooting the questions.
Okay. All right. So now, do you do a lot of collaborations with MGTOW? Or I should actually let's before we answer that question, let me ask you another question. I've seen a lot of newer MGTOW channels that are out there. Do you have any advice for a newer MGTOW content creator or a smaller MGTOW content creator to help them make their channel be more successful?
Produce daily content. Talk about personal stuff. Talk about things that people can actually use in their life, instead of just nebulous talk about hypergamy and hypoagency and all this kind of theoretical stuff. Like, apply it to your daily life. Observe things and share those observations, because you'll connect with people a lot better.
Okay. And then with a lot of the new MGTOW content creators that are out there, or the content creators who are using the MGTOW label, I know in one of your recent videos you talked about how there were some content creators that they were MGTOW, and then they are no longer MGTOW, and they move on to something else, and they use it. And I think one of the examples you gave was Voltaire, and it was funny because it kind of it kind of struck a chord with me, because I used to remember him commenting on videos, and then all of a sudden he went away, and I was trying to figure out where he went. And then when you brought that up in your video, it made a lot of sense. Are there a lot of MGTOW content creators that do that?
Oh, you see them all the time. Like, you don't know, right? Like, they'll basically do MGTOW content for a while, and then they just change, or they just quit because they don't get the subs that they're looking for. I mean, people, like, they'll get 5,000-10,000 subs in the first few months. Like, people don't understand that it took me, like, I don't know, like almost a year to get to, like, let me see, it took about a year to get to about 10,000 subs. And it was a lot of work, like daily content,
Sure.
and there was nobody there to like promote, and I just kind of had to keep producing the content on my own, and people would just stumble and subscribe, right? So it's like 30-40 subscribers a day. New content producers put stuff out and they get like 500 subscribers a day for the first like few months. It's like, it's really easy, right? Like, because the ground is already fertile, they just put their stuff out there, and all of a sudden there's a huge rush of people coming, and that must feel amazing, right? Like, they just put that down, and all of a sudden these people show up, right? Like, it's interesting. And then, but they get discouraged once they lose that initial bump in traffic. Then
Right.
they kind of, like, I think a lot of people are opportunists. They see it as like a great way to kind of build up a YouTube channel, and then once they have the followers, then they can kind of slowly go in a different direction. But I don't know. I don't know how successful Voltaire is because I don't really see any ads on his videos.
Right.
So if there's sure you can copy content from other people and repost and do a 50-second or a minute long intro of that content that you're reposting. Sure, that'll work to gain subscribers and views, but in the end, are you actually going to make enough money to sustain the channel? I don't know, right? Like
Right.
it really depends. It depends
Right.
on what you're looking for.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like I come from an MRA background, and so a lot of the content that I put out is political in nature, or it has some uh, legal ramifications and things like that. And I do put out MGTOW content, but I've noticed that I mean, and I've said this a few times before. A lot of the MGTOW content has already been created when it comes to the theoretical stuff and things like that. Again, old Stardust, Spetnaz, Barbar, Paul Proteus, your old videos, TFM's old videos. There's a lot of good red pill MGTOW content that is out there. And so I'm trying to not only apply it, but I'm also trying to show that these other issues, at least that I think, are relevant to men going their own way as well. So there is
The
that.
problem with old content is that nobody really watches it. Like unless you're like okay, if you go to a YouTube channel and you start following and subscribing and following a YouTube channel, you're not going to watch the old content. Like I just don't find any interest in watching stuff that someone produced 3 years ago, 4 years ago. You want fresh stuff, right? You want the new content. And so the old stuff, you might go back into the back catalog and listen to things here and there, but you're not really going to go into the same depth. I mean, like TFM is a great example of this. Like he puts out two, maybe sometimes three videos a day, and they get what, 10, 15,000 views per new video.
Right.
So out of his total views, let's say he gets 50,000, 45, 50,000. That's like more than half of his daily views come from the new videos. So if he stopped producing new content, like his views would like drop in half right away, right?
That
So
makes sense.
people are stumbling into the old content, but they're probably consuming new content more. And even for me, like I'll put a new video out and it gets 20,000 views. So and my daily, I'd say average is I don't know, it's like 50,000. That's being relatively like conservative. So that's about 40% of the views to my channel on a daily basis are new videos. So 60% are older videos. So I mean that's pretty sizable, but people are there for the new content. They're not there for the old content. So that's kind of that's just kind of how it works.
That makes sense.
Like, I mean, you have to go back and you have to like find content that's interesting. And with TFM, he puts a lot of like current events, right? And the problem with current events is it's current events. Like it's good today or tomorrow. It's going to gain you a lot of views in a hurry, but it's not going to have the same longevity as a lot of my videos because I make them kind of universal. So like you can watch it like years later and it'll still have the same impact. It'll still
So
have the
it's
same.
so they're more evergreen. Is that what you're saying?
I don't even know what you mean by that, but
Well, I'm talking when I say evergreen, I'm talking about basically content that is relevant throughout different time periods, or rather than certain content where it's like you're talking about a news story that might be relevant for 3 days or might be relevant for a week, and then it loses its relevance over time.
yeah, I mean that's like for example the travel videos that I was doing. Like a lot of the places they're not going anywhere. Like you can go and see that ghost town 5 years from now, for 10 years from now, it'll still be there. It'll still look the same. So the odds of you putting up a video and person going back to, and seeing that place um, is good. Like you want to produce content that's going to be universal. It's never going to really lose its impact because that means the content will actually your back catalog will produce and generate revenue long after it's been produced. It'll continue to spit off income. It'll still be relevant as opposed
Right.
to just being current event. That's why I don't like doing current event stuff. And my format doesn't really work well with current events either because sometimes I have a huge lag between producing the content and releasing it. So yeah.
That makes sense. Well, Sandman, it's been an awesome interview, and I really
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time out, to come and sit down and chat with us today. We're going to head into the Q&A section, but before we do, I want to say a few things first. But before well, let's even go before that. Before we do you have anything else that you want to say before we jump into Q&A?
No, you've covered things fairly well. I mean, you're a great interviewer, so no issues here.
I appreciate it. Guys, I noticed there's some questions in the Twitch chat. I wanted to kind of address that a little bit. Twitch has changed its terms of service, and its terms of service are far more sensitive than they used to be. So unfortunately, I've had to turn up my auto mod for Twitch. My mods have also been kind of keeping an eye on things as far as those types of things are concerned. But unfortunately, because I'm a bit paranoid about Twitch's terms of service, I'm not going to be fielding any questions regarding women's rights or repeal the 19th or anything like that, because I don't want my videos or my channel to get flagged for hate speech. So if your question doesn't get asked because it's along those lines, it's no disrespect to you. I just don't want to be deplatformed because of some over exuberant social justice warrior taking something out of context. So I want to apologize in advance for that. I know that some of these questions are extremely important, but unfortunately, because I'm on Twitch right now, this is not the platform to discuss them. But with that said, I wanted to thank everybody for watching today. In addition, let you know that if you have Amazon Prime and you subscribe to my channel, it costs you nothing, and it does help me out, and I do appreciate it. And then finally, on the lower right-hand side of your screen, if you're on a desktop machine or you're on Twitch TV, you'll see the little +1 Bukkake choke slams that come up occasionally. You can use those, redeem them, so that you can ask questions and go from there. And those will be saved via Streamlabs. I'll go ahead and address those questions so that you can get those questions asked. If you don't have a desktop or you're not on Twitch TV, let's say you're on a mobile device and you still want to ask a question of myself or Sandman, please go ahead and put questions in caps and brackets and then direct the question who it's to, and then we'll go ahead and get that question answered as quickly as we can. And please remember, try not to ask multi-part questions so that we give everybody an opportunity to ask questions. So with that said, I'm going to jump into Streamlabs. I know there was some questions for last week I want to touch on that apparently I missed. This question is from Cobra Redro, and it is, it says, which one of those spurging potatoes was responsible for TFM losing his Twitch channel? Honestly, I don't know. No one's taken credit for it, but it could have been a variety of different people. It was just what happened to him was completely wrong. He's been constantly attacked, and he's been constantly targeted by people who have been really going out of their way to work to deplatform him, and it's wrong. The United States has free speech laws, and just because you don't like what somebody has to say doesn't mean that you should go out of your way and deplatform them. I think that's unethical. Frankly, if somebody says something you don't like, my suggestion is you change the channel or you go do something else. And then we'll go from there. All right, next question is from Ryu Corrido, #1. It says, I have a feminist teacher that's trying to make us believe in intersectional feminism. How do I deal with that? The problem is that with intersectional feminism, you're going to see a lot of indoctrination. I mean, there are people out there that have been practicing entryism and indoctrination at a variety of levels of academia, all the way from preschool up to postgraduate education. So my suggestion is just pretend that you buy into it, ghost in plain sight, and move on with your day, because they're going to continue to do so. If you give them pushback, you're painting a bullseye on your head, and you're going to create more problems for yourself than you're going to solve. Sandman, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, it's probably been 22 years ago now that I went to Ryerson University, the same place where Karen Strawn spoke. And my program was very much run by feminists and cultural Marxists. And this is like 22, 23 years ago. So Ryerson University was known as a bastion, like a safe place for all of these social justice warriors and leftists, socialists, communists. And they were pushing this stuff down on us. And there was a bunch of us, let's say about maybe 5 or 10 of us in my program, and we were totally against it. We were totally fighting against it. I made an assignment. I did an assignment for one of my classes. They got the dean after me. They tried to kick me out of the school, which was kind of interesting. They got the hate crimes department of the Metro Toronto Police after me. we're talking 22 years ago here. We're not talking like 5 years ago or like more recently. This is all, all these experiences are kind of like I didn't really think about them at the time, like that you could actually stand up against that type of thing back then. But yeah, if you stand up against it, they will try to get rid of you. And if they were doing that 22 years ago, I can just imagine what they'd be doing today for stuff that's not even as serious. So you could ghost but are you in the right program if you have to kind of have to hide, and you can't express yourself, especially in a creative arts program? Like, I don't know.
Right. I think that's important as well. And it's funny you mentioned that. I remember when right after my first divorce ended and I ended up with custody of my two oldest kids, I went back to college and I was just getting a general transfer degree, an associate's transfer degree. And as part of the transfer requirement, I had to take a sociology class. Well, one of my kids was sick one day. I missed a day of class. I had the syllabus with me and I misplaced my syllabus and I read this chapter in the sociology book and I couldn't remember which portions of the chapter to read. So I read it all. I go back to class the next day and I'm sitting in the class and I'm, probably second row, and the teacher starts talking about the chapter and she's giving the lecture of the chapter. And she's completely taking the chapter out of context. And she was basically bashing men and she was using the textbook to do it. And I was like, well, that's not what the chapter says at all. So, I raised my hand and I respectfully said, look, this is not what the chapter says. It actually says something completely different. And she looked at me and she was like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And she got really upset. And I was like, actually, it does. And she's like, well, cite your source, cite your source. So I did. I opened up the chapter and I cited the source in the paragraph. And she's like, you weren't supposed to read that. And I was like, well, I apologize. I misplaced my syllabus, so I decided to take the ownership to read it all. I figured, a little more knowledge is better than not enough. And in this case, it seems like I was right. Oh, she was furious. Well, and she had been bashing men about how men don't take care of their kids and this and that. And so I was like, and she was like, well, that wasn't what you were supposed to read. And I said, well, let's go ahead and move on to a different subject. Let's talk about parenting for a minute. And she's like, okay, let's talk about parenting. And I was like, I'm a single father with custody of my kids. And you say that men don't take responsibility for their children. And I'm a living example of showing you that that's not the case. So she got really pissed off about that. And she was really furious about that. So one thing led to another. And she kind of gave me a little bit of pushback. And then there was a black guy in the back of the room. And he's like, well, I'm a single father. I got custody of my kids too. So all of a sudden, like, the class starts turning on her, and she ended up kicking me out of class, and I had to go to the dean. And I talked to the dean, and I was like, look, I need to get out of this class, and you guys can't penalize me for it because this chick's she's got an agenda. Say that again.
How many years ago was this?
Oh, this is in 93.
Oh, okay, so even before that. Wow.
Yeah, I'm a little old. So,
yeah,
all right. I'm going to finish these last 5 questions from the Streamlabs, and then we'll get on to the Q&A from the chat.
I wanted to bring one last thing up.
Go ahead.
So yeah, it was either the program I went to, or I could have actually taken psychology at U of T, and I would have actually had Jordan Peterson as my professor back in the 90s, which is kind of hilarious.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could have crossed paths with him back in the 90s when he was teaching there. It would have been hilarious.
There you go. All right. So the next question is from The Observer. The question says, like many, Sandman was my first introduction to MGTOW. Just wondering, Sandman, do you consume as much content as you produce, since you produce a lot?
I consume quite a bit of content. Like I'll watch a lot of Black Pigeon Speaks, Computing Forever. But in terms of MGTOW content, I'll watch probably one TFM video a day. I'll occasionally, maybe once a week, I'll actually watch one of or listen to DDJ's videos. Like, it just depends if it's a stream or if it's the shorter content. I don't have time for the full stream, so I listen to the shorter content. Paul Proteus, I'll consume stuff when he puts it out. Who else do I mean, there's a lot of new creators. I just can't even begin to like crack into what they're saying. Like, I'll maybe watch their top viewed videos just because that's usually the stuff that's that's the most interesting. But I mean, yeah, I'll consume probably 5-10 videos a day. I'll produce one video a day. So yeah, I'm consuming more than I'm producing, but just depends on who it is and what it's about.
Okay. Next question from Waifu Works, DDJ or Sandman. What are your thoughts on groups of men who refuse to acknowledge they want female validation and why? Let me take a shot at this first, and then Sandman, go ahead and weigh in. I make no qualms that I am a reluctant man going my own way. And that's just because things have gotten so bad that in a cost benefit analysis, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And so, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is at some level, I wouldn't mind having female validation, but I don't need it. And there's a lot of guys I know that they wouldn't mind having female validation, but they don't need it. I think that refusing to acknowledge that you want female validation when you really want it, I think is probably more happens more often with the younger guys than with the older guys, because you're prime breeding age, your hormones are raging, your sex drive is super high and through the roof. And I mean, and even at some age, like puberty and maybe even your early 20s, the thirst is real. I mean, you want to procreate. So, and I think that's kind of a stage of that kind of red pill thing as you're headed to starting to go your own way. I think it's somewhat natural in some ways. Sandman, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it would be nice, but the problem is meeting somebody that you can actually have a conversation with that's more complex and more interesting. And I'm not really finding that anymore. And I'm just, how do I say this? It's like validation would be good, but also my brain is more important to me now. Like for 15 years of my adult life, when I was in relationships, it felt like there was a weight keeping my mental abilities down. And the moment I became single, I found that I had all these amazing things to say that even shocked myself with my own observations. And I couldn't really express those things while I was in a relationship because I was white knighting so much. And then once I got out of that white knighting mode, I started to really express the things that I observed subconsciously that I wasn't really thinking about. And the moment I got back into a relationship, the validation was great. The high of being with somebody was awesome. But then my brain started melting out of my head. So it's like, I start, I balance it out. I say to myself, I need my brain because of what I do. So I can't really be in a relationship and do what I do. It just doesn't work.
So what you're saying is that while one head was getting hard, the other one was getting soft?
Pretty much.
Okay. Waifu Works asks for Sandman, what's the chance of you doing more videos with your actual voice?
I find that people don't really listen to them as much. I find I've done them before, and like I put out a couple of 2, 3, 4 in a row, and like the first one, a lot of people would watch, and then all of a sudden, the second and third one, the views would like drop in half. So people don't want the real voice; they want the well thought out, short content that gets right to the point. They want that.
Okay.
I don't know why they want that, but they don't want just. And I'll get people in the comments. Oh, it's great to hear your real voice. I listen more often if you put out more content like this. Sure, that person might do that, but the majority of people wouldn't.
Right. All right. Next question from Waifu Works again. Sandman, what advice do you have for men who have to work closely with women in an office?
Run away as fast as you can. I had somebody ask this question recently, and I'm just like, it depends on how well you can kind of fit into the office culture. If you can fit in and, kind of like do the gun thing with your hand without really getting thrown in jail, yeah, you could get away with it. Well, I wouldn't suggest doing the gun thing with the hand, because now that means you're going to shoot up your office. They'll call the cops on you. But I'm thinking, if you're working with a lot of women in your office, just try to transfer yourself to another department. Try to like, if you're better looking, kind of use that to your advantage to kind of find the woman that's in charge and kind of like suck up to her and make her think that you might be sort of attracted to her. And, she might actually feel like, he's nice, and, he kind of likes me, and, and then she'll basically try to keep all the other women in line. just don't do anything. Just kind of, just be very careful with that. But yeah, just don't hit on her, like actually hit on her.
Yeah. All right. Next question from Kova Redro. Sandman, do you have any plans to continue your God Among MGTOW videos? They were some of your best, and what brought me to MGTOW.
I could probably do one about Nietzsche at some point. I'll probably do one about him. But it's really hard to find guys who are MGTOWs throughout history. It's like really, really difficult to find those people. And I think I've pretty much found most of them. I mean, once people start suggesting, hey, do a video on Leonardo da Vinci, and I'm like, yeah, but he was probably gay. Like,
Right.
or Michelangelo. Like, he paints women that look like men. Like, like that's a man with boobs. Like, that guy's got to be gay. Like, he would paint, differently if it was actually a woman. I don't know.
So in other words, he
So,
was into traps.
yeah, pretty much.
Okay. All right. So those are pretty much the questions from Streamlabs. Let's go ahead and head to the Q&A. Feeding the Wolf and Rose, what do you got?
All right. As DDJ said, if you have a question, parentheses, question, who it's to, and make sure it's actually legible, like a 6-year-old didn't write it. We'll start out now. Incapacus says, question, do you enjoy your doll and feel it's a suitable replacement for a female? Obviously, that's for Sandman.
I enjoy the doll. I like the insert. It's the best part about the insert is you can just use it on its own if you need the doll all the time. The doll is great eye candy and like visual stimulation, especially if you move it around. But in terms of companionship and all that kind of stuff, like I like a more interactive experience in terms of like being able to get feedback back from the doll, right? So that's why I've been thinking and toying with the idea of a sex doll that basically projects augmented reality or virtual reality onto the doll. So if you touch it and you actually like there's sensors built in, like I would find that more stimulating, and I think that's kind of where I'd like to see things heading. But right now I don't see any products like that, and it's very difficult to create something like that, and I'm slowly doing my research, and it's very difficult. Like the technology is so limited. It's like trying to create today's video games on a 286. It's like, how do you do that, right? Like you have to really get creative in terms of figuring out how to maximize the technology that we have right now.
Okay. Next question.
All right, this question is for both of you from Artemis the Kitten. The majority of Me Too cases involve sexual relationships between women and high-powered men. What do you guys think is the tipping point to cause celebrities like Henry Cavill to fear even talking and approaching women?
Oh, I think it's already happened. I think that when it comes to, Henry Cavill, and it comes to a lot of prominent actors and actresses, I mean, the problem is that feminism has created a promiscuity culture across the Western society. And so you have, a lot of like this, and I say this because you can draw a straight line from the sex liberation movement right to feminism, and they are all interconnected. So you have this culture where, you have people partner swapping, you've got the BDSM community, and I'm not saying that this didn't exist prior to feminism. I'm just saying that feminism amplified all these things tenfold and made a lot of these things go mainstream. So now that you have this over-sexualized culture, the problem is that you have all these guys participating in a promiscuity culture because they're like, hey, I'm getting laid. This is great. Well, then they don't realize that once they're done being useful, now they're going to get falsely accused of everything else that's going on. Now that the celebrities are starting to turn on it, you can see, for example, with Henry Cavill, you can see, for an example, with him, not only is he terrified of approaching women because of the hashtag Me Too movement, but when they criticized him, he recanted his statement. He walked back his statement because he was so terrified of the backlash. They say, you always know who rules over you based on who you can't talk about. So that's my 2 cents there. Sandman, what do you think?
I didn't realize that he recanted what he had just said. I
Recently,
just saw that. Yeah. Okay. I mean, he's trying to basically play up on female nature and say women want this, and then so it should be accepted, and then women are like, no, we don't want this. Well, he's like, okay, well, I'll take it back then. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the whole Me Too thing, it just like I'm like again, I try to stay away from having discussions about any political thing or sexual thing with women because it just does not end well. So you just want to stay away from that. So it's just going to get worse and worse. I see it getting worse and worse, and you're going to see more Hollywood celebs, male celebs, virtue signaling constantly on Twitter, like, oh, look what happened to her. This is so horrible. They won't believe any of that bullshit. They're just gonna say it because they want to get the next role in whatever film. So it's just going to become like a business, right? They're just going to do and say and put on the put on the role that society expects them to play. That's it.
Okay. Next question.
All right. Green Spud Trades question. In Sandman's earlier videos, he said that his declining health was a tipping point for dumping his girlfriend. Does Sandman still feel the same way about the correlation of his health and stress from his relationship?
Yeah, definitely. Like relationships, like talking too much. I'm a very communicative person. If I get into a relationship, I'm going to have a conversation with my partner for an hour a day, 2 hours a day. That's a lot of talking. And that wears away at my throat. Like even now, my throat's kind of getting dry and acidy. And if I talk for very long, it starts to really affect me. And then I could get like a throat infection. So that's when I noticed those symptoms when in the last relationship I had. That's when the symptoms started getting really bad. So not being able to communicate with people using your voice all the time is kind of limiting in terms of having a relationship. So yeah, I'm not going to be doing that.
Okay. Next question.
All right. This is from Sticky Fingers Jr. For both. Are you planning on doing more MGTOW ghosting videos in the future?
Yes.
Define ghosting videos. Sorry, hello?
Define ghosting videos?
Yeah.
I guess, there's the, guys who are ghosting in plain sight. In other words, how to ghost and those type of things.
Just ghosting, like in general, tips. Oh, okay, gotcha. I don't know. I mean, I've done a few of them, but I mean, realistically speaking, like it's ghosting depending on where you are. Like if you're working or if you're out in public or, just it depends on the situation, right? So I'll probably do it if it's specific situations, but not a broad ghosting video, probably.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed as well. Next question.
All right, this one's from Inca Pesa. Should be a quick and easy one. Why do you perform the robotic monotone in your videos when your natural voice sounds fine? It's for Sandman, obviously.
To be honest, I don't know. Like when I'm reading stuff, that's like I'm trying to get through it as quickly as I can. And when I'm editing or when I send it to my editor, it's easier to edit the chunks together if they all sound the same, because then you don't know where the edits are going to be. Whereas if you're trying to enunciate and go up and down and like put lower your voice and raise it and I'll do all this kind of stuff, then what ends up happening is it's very difficult to edit chunks of audio together without you realizing that they've been edited together. So that's a big part of it. Another part is just getting the emotion out of there, so it just becomes about a stream of rational thought. Because if you're focused on emotional ups and downs in a person's talk, then you're focusing on the parts that the person speaking wants you to focus on, instead of just letting you focus on whatever part of the talk that you think is important.
Okay. Next question.
Okay, this one's from Waifu Works for Sandman. I'm going to have to interpret some of it. Sandman, TFM mentioned a brief moment of emotional attachment and being emphatic towards it, meaning his doll. Did you experience this?
Yes, I did. But again, it's kind of like you're masturbating and you're like, yes, it feels sexual, but it doesn't feel the same as a complete sexual experience. So it's a substitute. I'd say it's about, towards real contact with the woman, I'd say it's about 40% of the way there, but we still got a ways to go to make that other 60%, that uncanny valley we got to get past. So, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Next question.
All right. This one's from The Plumber Speaks. Have either of you thought about re-uploading your older relevant content for newer subscribers? That may be a way to get your older videos seen.
Sandman?
I basically recently redid a video for I can't remember. It was a book review, and it was an older video, but I just kind of reread it and in a new way. So people, yeah, that could work, but again, it's almost like you'd have to create a new channel and you'd have to start putting the content out there again. It's a lot of work, especially when you're doing content on a daily basis. So probably not going to happen. DDJ?
Okay. Oh, probably not. Yeah. So next question.
Seems like a pain in the ass. Okay, the next question is from the Random Nutter. I'm just going to read this verbatim because I'm not entirely sure about the context. For both, how can we best help people to take their own side in an argument and not cuck for the status quo and cheers?
Can you go first? Where to go with that one?
Oh yeah, I can dance around it a little bit. You know, I think that taking your own side in an argument, I think is number one. I think that we as a society have lost our ability, and I might be doing a video on this at some point. We have lost our ability to civilly disagree. And what ends up happening is that a lot of times when there is disagreement, what happens is that whoever we're disagreeing with, we have a tendency to basically see these people as flawed, as opposed to seeing that we like these people and that we just merely disagree with what it is that they have a position on, you know, like their position on a particular subject. So one of the things that I've noticed is, and you see this a lot on the left, where if you disagree with somebody like a progressive or a leftist on an issue, they will hate you for the disagreement, as opposed to just disagreeing with the issue and keeping the relationship is important. They will cease having a relationship with you rather than address the disagreement itself. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that we as a society should try to work toward maintaining relationships even when there's areas of disagreement, because we value, as a society, we seem to value controversy and disagreement more than we value the relationships. And that is a huge mistake. So when you're talking about being able to take your own side and helping people take their own side in a disagreement rather than going with the status quo, I would say make sure that that person whom you're seeing the disagreement with, make sure that they feel comfortable in the relationship, make sure that they understand that that relationship is important and that particular disagreement is not a deal killer. Now, with that said, I will also say that there are some disagreements that are deal killers. There are some disagreements and there are some value statements that do destroy relationships, and they should. So it really depends on the context, but I think that, you know, helping people think for themselves and helping people feel like they're not going to get backlash against them for having a difference of opinion, I think is absolutely important. And it's something that we as a society have moved away from. And it's something that you're seeing. I mean, there's a lot of people in the conservative camp that are really trying to get back to that, where they're saying, let's have a discussion about ideals rather than witch hunts. So, I mean, we're seeing some of this civil discourse return, but there is a lot of pushback. So it is an uphill battle. I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis.
I think in general in society, men are becoming more agreeable because women are becoming more disagreeable. So as women, you know, turn up the anger and hostility towards what men are saying and doing, men just have to become more agreeable to get laid. So you're seeing that huge shift, and most men are complete cucks now. And it's getting worse and worse. And, you know, I've noticed this before when I would be talking to a strong woman and I would say something that was disagreeable. Sometimes the men would kind of snap out of their trance and they would basically jump on her with the same comment. And she would be shocked that all of a sudden all these men were like saying something that she didn't agree with. And she freaked out. And she's like, and then she had to kind of police everybody and go around like, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't. It's like, what the fuck is going on here? Like it was the most bizarre thing in the world. And then, you know, I still held my original position, but all the men recanted on what they had originally said, which was to agree with what I had just said. And then I looked like the bad guy, and they all kind of went back to being good. And it's horrible. It's horrible to see, like, you know, grown men like in their 50s and 60s and 40s and 70s, like just kind of recanting. You know, they can't express themselves because they're so worried about losing access to their regular lay. It's pretty scary.
Yeah. Well, here's a pro tip.
Yep.
With feminist created promiscuity culture, there's available women everywhere. So there is that
quality of the women, and it's men want that. Men want the same woman on a regular basis. We're just designed for that more
Sure.
than women are.
Sure.
So like, if a guy finds an amazing woman and he's just not going to risk rocking the boat. If he does rock the boat, he will recant immediately if he thinks he's gone too far.
Right.
So,
all right.
But there's a lot of women out there that are just, but like garbage women. Right? So it's kind of like, what are you going to do? You want one of those that'll drive you crazy after a couple weeks? You'll get more angry being with somebody like that after a couple weeks than the effort is worth. So that's it.
Right. All right. Next question.
This one's from your infamous NYC. For both, what are your thoughts on having a family while living abroad? Was considering having a family in another country and living in the U.S. for money. Possible pitfalls to consider?
I'm at this point, I wanted to do surrogacy. At this point, I can't do it because of my health. There's just no way I can do it. I mean, I could technically do it, but then again, why would you want to have kids in another country that you can't even see that often? Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're not really going to raise them. You're just going to send them a check. So you might as well just marry someone here and get divorced and do the same thing.
Right. I think that long distance relationships over an extended period of time don't work. And we see this a lot with the military, especially in combat arms MOSs, where, you know, the guy deploys for extended periods, you know, and he does his full 20. He gets done with his full 20 years. He comes home, and then the first thing that happens is that he divorces his wife. So, you know, I think you have to be able to, the problem is that it's not just being married that's important or keeping the marriage active that's important. It's about having a relationship within that marriage that makes the marriage viable. And we have gotten to a point in society where women have been incentivized to not support that relationship and to not invest in that relationship beyond a certain point. So I think that the challenge is that, you know, if you are interested or you've fallen in love with somebody in another country and it's a more of a patriarchal country, or it's a less feminized country, or a country that doesn't embrace feminism or socialism, stay in that country. Don't come here, and find a way to work within the economy of that particular country. Because if you separate and you come to the United States for money, the odds of her getting lonely and stepping outside the relationship increase. But more importantly, or just as importantly, you know, you're going to want companionship at some point too. And I mean, are you going to step outside the relationship and find somebody else, you know, even if it's only for the evening? I mean, these are viable questions. And then on top of that, if you're not investing that time in her, you're not investing that time in the relationship. I mean, one of the reasons that people get married at a young age, obviously, is the hormones and childbearing, but it's to get used to one another so that when they get older, they have things to talk about, they have things to do, and they have things in common. You know, if you're with somebody for 15 years and you don't have anything in common, eventually you're going to grow apart, even if there's no infidelity. So you have to invest in the relationship sort of like a garden, because if you don't, weeds grow in its place and kill everything that you've worked for.
Yeah, I totally agree. But the problem with relationships in other countries, like a lot of people say, oh, go to the Philippines and get married. Well, yeah, they just introduced divorce in the Philippines.
Right.
And the other thing in other countries is, you know, right now they might not be gynocentric, but what happens?
They will be.
Well, right now, okay, I found this interesting article, and they said that in 1996, 12% of world politicians were females. Now that number is up to 24%. You know, Sweden, we've talked about Sweden. Sweden was up to like 55% female politicians. Now it's dropped back to like 45, 46%. But in 20 years, you're looking at 50% of the politicians in the entire world being women. So you're looking at governments becoming like overbearing mothers. trying to like help the third world while destroying their men in their own countries. So, sure, that marriage might work, but once the government's changed, it's done. Like the whole world will be the same. Like, countries will say, the Canadian government will say, well, what happens in the Philippines doesn't stay in the Philippines. We're gonna allow that alimony money to flow to the Philippines from Canada, right? If you get like, who knows what'll happen? Like, you don't know. Like, the laws will just change.
Right. Right. All right. So let's do this. We're at an hour and a half, and I try to cut the stream off at about 90 minutes. Let's take one last question, and then we'll call it a day, especially because, Sandman, you said your voice is kind of giving you some challenges. So last question.
All right. I have three questions. Two of them are really good.
Choose one.
I know. I'm struggling to do
well,
so.
We could do both of them. I'm feeling okay. So
you sure?
Okay. Oh, let's do that then.
All right,
that's fine.
We'll do the two good questions. All right. The first one is from Blue Shogun 96. Sonny Crockett rules. For Sandman, do you believe that daily content is important for even non-MGTOW channels? I know you are self-employed, and I'm pursuing game dev and looking to gain followers on media platforms as I work on and release my games.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't produce daily content, people forget you or move on to another channel pretty quickly. So you have to keep the grind going. That's just the nature of the beast.
All right, sweet. That was easy. All right, the last one is from Artemis the Kitten, and it's a question for DDJ. Is it true that women can revoke consent under the law, or is it just a talking point for feminists? I often get responses saying this is not true under the law.
Actually, so here's the thing. Women can revoke consent at any time, and some jurisdictions allow them a lot more freedom to revoke consent than others. And it's getting to the point now where, I mean, even though TFM has talked about, basically revoking consent mid-thrust, I mean, that's happening. I mean, there was a doctor that had sex with a woman, and the sex was completely consensual. And he squeezed her breasts and bruised them. Well, later on, she realized she had bruises on her breasts, and so she accused him of sexual assault. They took him to court. They charged him. They convicted him of sexual assault, and he had to fight it all the way up to the Court of Appeals just to get it revoked. And then you have Sweden with its, condom laws, where Julian Assange has been imprisoned in the UK for years because he was falsely accused of sexual assault because he had consensual sex with women without a condom. So, you have that combined with yes means yes, combined with everything else that's been going on. That's absolutely a concern. And so, even consent like agreements don't necessarily help. I mean, I know that there's guys out there, there's like a consent app for the phone and things like that. Well, what if she says she was coerced into consenting? Well, now you have a forced consent that isn't really consent, and now you have a variety of different legal questions that are going to come up. You have to understand that feminists have armchair quarterbacked this a lot. And when I say this, I mean, I've done some research. I have a video scripted that I haven't recorded yet about parallel systems of injustice. Feminist legal scholars have been armchair quarterbacking this since the 70s. So, there have been lots of attorneys that have been talking about these questions and been trying to find ways to implement these laws all the way across the board in every country that's adopted feminism. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it happen. So, yeah, absolutely, she can revoke consent. And it's a problem. So I think that just, be careful out there if you're sexually active with a woman, and just try to keep the relationship strong in addition to whatever sexual experience is going on. But I'll tell you, if you just went to my sponsor, the Dollhouse, you could avoid a lot of that drama. Just saying. So with that said, though, I think that's kind of the last question. So let's do this. I'm going to go ahead and do some shill alerts, and then we'll get out of here. But before I do, I wanted to thank Rose for setting up this interview with Sandman. And Sandman, I really appreciate you taking the time out today and making time to sit down and chat and to field the questions from my audience. It was an honor.
Yeah, no, it was a great interview. You're a great interviewer, so it's good.
I appreciate it. And guys, if you want to support my work, feel free to, hashtag shill alert, check me out on Patreon. There is a MGTOW group on Minds. Feel free to join that. Minds is a free speech platform. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at misandrytoday.com. You can send me a message there. Also, in case I'm targeted by YouTube, please subscribe to me on Bitchute. And I'm also trying to get my channel set up on Real.video, which is Natural News' new free speech platform as well. And then, of course, if you haven't read the book yet, check out my book, The Feminist Lie. It was never about equality. And then finally, if you have Twitch Prime, feel free to subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it does benefit the channel. I appreciate everybody who tuned in today, and appreciate everybody who supports the channel and supports my book, as well as supports Sandman as well. I hope everybody has a great day. Also, finally, while I'm remembering, Lone Wolf and Rose, thank you for fielding the questions and getting the Q&A done. And thank you for everybody else who was a part of the stream today. It's all appreciated.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yep. All right, guys. With that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care.